Hello, nice to meet you. First of all, let me say thank you to the people that wanted me here, and thank to you that decided to spend some time to listen to my story. My name is Alessandro, and I come from Italy. I work as Chief Operating Officer and developer at Bitbull. We are a fully remote company helping merchants to grow their business online with Magento. I'm here to tell you the story of how I got involved in the MSI-Project. That's probably something that you heard of during this conference. Why I jumped into the project, the lessons I learned, and why and how you can do the same in the next days. Brief introduction of what Multisource inventory is. It's a project that represents an evolution of the catalog inventory module that comes with Magento and gives a lot of new features and will be released as an open source module. So it will be freely available with likely Magento 2.3 release and will be evolved over time since the first release will be an MVP, a minimum viable product. That means that you will have all the basic functionality that will be used by merchants to test it, and that will allow us to gather feedback in order to improve it more and more. It's a new kind of approach to cooperation. A group of volunteers from Magento Community joined forces with the Magento Community Engineering Team and to achieve the result of developing this new piece of functionality. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to jump into the project. I was very interested in this new kind of collaboration, one of the reasons. But before delving into more technical aspects, I'd like to share what were, in my opinion, the opportunities and the benefits that this project gave to me and that obviously can give to you. Well, Magento 2 is a big framework. It can't be mastered in a week or in a month. And I'm a big fan of learn by doing. So joining a project like this is a great opportunity of learning a lot by doing something useful and practical. What's more, we have the opportunity to learn and adopt the best practice directly taught by the architects of Magento. What's more, since we are developing for future release of Magento, we see the future in the sense that we apply concepts and architectural changes that will be part of the future releases on Magento. So it's a way of anticipating the future changes to be a step ahead. And we will see some examples of this. Last but not least, it's an opportunity to work with incredible smart people, both from Magento and the community. Igor, Valery, Lars, just to mention some of them. They became friends, and it's really an amazing group that's growing day by day. What are the benefits of working to this module? Self-improvement, first of all, not only as professional, but also as individuals, because it gives us the possibility to give back to the community. That's an idea that accompanies my working experience. Well, the module itself is a great piece of value because it gives a lot of new features. It will open up opportunities to merchants. It will be, I'm sure it will be adopted by a lot of merchants and will open up possibilities like full dropshipping support, for example. It gives inspiration. It gave me inspiration to talk here today, and I already wrote some articles on the subject, and more will come. And what's more, it gives me a lot of knowledge about things that I put into my day-by-day job, and I hope that it will be the same for you. And last but not least, swag. We are all nerds, and we like stickers, we love t-shirts, gadgets, and Magento doesn't spare on these. I had my gadgets, you will have your gadgets. People that attended the day yesterday know what I'm speaking about. So let's switch to something more technical. I'd like to ask you, how many of you are developers? Please raise your hand. Okay, how many of you already heard of domain-driven design? Okay, a little bit. I need to explain what DDD to make you understand how we applied it in MSI-Project. This is what Martin Fowler tells us about DDD. DDD is not a methodology, is not a framework. DDD is an approach. DDD is a set of tools that we can use to make decisions about how our software has to be written, has to be developed. The focus of DDD is on domain, because the domain is where the business value is. So it treats arguments like domain models, contact boundaries. We'll see more in the following slides. There is another important sentence by Vaughan Vernon that even doesn't even mention software development. For him, DDD is all about developing an ubiquitous language and identifying bounded contexts. What does it mean? Ubiquitous language is the language that is spoken by the domain expert. Defining a language, speaking the language of the business, reduces the distance between the business and the developers. After all, we don't need to write software to build up abstraction of data. It's not programming. It's if we do this, we do mapping. We need to be able to convert the business value into behaviors. And to do this, an important concept that's introduced by domain-driven design is the idea that we have to split the domain into smaller bounded contexts where entities get their meaning and can be designed in a simpler way. Indeed, we are encouraged in DDD to expose behavior rather than their properties. An example speaks more than words. You can see an example here of what is a classical approach in which we expose the data layer. For us, assigning a customer to an order can be setting a lot of properties on it. But it's not what a domain expert, people from the business will think about. The next domain expert will tell that he or she assigns a customer to an order. So as you can see, the difference is likely, but it's very important because this way we can express the intent of our code. That's something that we don't express here. We are only exposing some setters that don't clearly express what is our intent calling them. Another important principle, we were taught to avoid repeating ourselves during object-oriented programming. In DDD, forget this principle. DDD encourages to avoid sharing domain models, because if we share domain models, we tend to generalize, and we tend to put in a domain model too many things, making complicated entities. Instead, when we focus on what we really need in a bounded context, we can make simpler entities. This brings to duplication, but also to simplification. Validation is an important topic in DDD. It's one of the most discussed topics. DDD consider that validation should be done based on context. It's obviously considered creating valid entities that are the entities with the basic set of functionality that identify them. But then when you have to use some domain model in a context, you have to apply local context. We will see example of these to be more clear. We have some building blocks here, just some naming that is useful to speak the same language. In this case, we are doing DDD live. I used a different font type here to remind to myself that that domain model speaks the language of the domain expert. What's a domain model? The domain model is the entity that encapsulates the data and the behavior that is used to build the solution that solves the business problem. Domain models can be implemented in several ways. That can be entities. That's what we are used to use in Magento when we persist things on the database. An entity is identified by typically an ID property and lives on our persistence layer. But a domain model can also be a value object. It is a set of properties. A value object is an object that is identified by its immutable state, and its identity is given by the value that it conveys. It doesn't necessarily have to be saved in a separate table. It can be part of an entity, as we will see. We have other definitions. For example, exposing behavior means exposing services that in OOP are developed as functional objects. An aggregate, to make an example, is an order. An order is not only, it's not a single entity, it is the aggregation, is the composition of different entities and value objects. Think an order. An order is made of master data and transactions and order lines, plus customer data and so on. So it's a combination of entities and value objects. And when we have to access all these components, we use the so-called aggregate truth. The aggregate truth is the main object that gives us access to all the related data. We already seen what is a bounded context. What's important to define, these are terms from domain-driven design, so I need to show them. When contexts need to speak each other, because it's where business value occurs, we have to be sure that the domain models that they share can be valid in the contexts, in both contexts, for example. So the software that we write to be sure that these entities are consistent between different contexts is called anti-corruption layer. Let's see some examples. The infamous reservation. We had a talk in which people did a lot of questions about this entity. Here, what I'm interested to say about the reservation is that it's an example in MSI of a domain model. Nothing new, apparently, but it's not a class that extends the abstract model that we have in Magento. Why? Because the abstract model in Magento is intended to be used when we have to build extensible entities, but the reservation is not an extensible entity. So we don't need to bring into reservation the complication of an extensible entity. So we create a simpler model, a simpler class. Okay, it's a repetition, it's a duplication because it has its own ID, it is persistent via dedicated resource models. It's a duplication, but of a simpler class that can be tested more easily since it's simpler. Sorry, just let me drink. How we do apply bounded context in MSI-Project? Well, when we designed the solution, when we designed the MSI, we decided to isolate some concepts. And we isolated these concepts in different modules. So for example, the inventory module, because, sorry, I didn't say that MSI-Project is a set of modules. It's not a single module. It will be a set of modules. And each module of the MSI represents a bounded context. In each module, we implement the data and behavior that's related to that specific domain. So for example, when we have to deal with inventory data and behavior, we put it in the inventory module. But when we, for example, have to deal with aspects related to catalog management, we don't put them in inventory module. We created another module called inventory catalog, and we put the data and behavior in that module. So we keep things separated, and we can keep things simpler. Behavior means services. We have services in MSI, and we have more and more in Magento. Services are functional objects that mean a class without a state, with only one method, typically an execute method, that will be called with parameters. This gives me the chance to show you how Magento is open to listening to our opinion, because, for example, in this poll, Igor asked us if we prefer to develop functional objects using a method called execute, or using the magic methods invoke that PHP gives us. And the community expressed his opinion. And summing up people that don't like magic with those that express the preference for execute, 80% of people prefer the execute method, and so will be. We have these functional objects with execute method. Valid entity. What is a valid entity? There are properties of an entity without which we couldn't instantiate an object. Things, for example, to an order. An order wouldn't exist without a number and a customer. So we define a valid entity, and we can instantiate an order, for example, only if we provide a number and a customer. Those properties are called invariants. But as soon as we switch context, and we, for example, need to issue an invoice for that order, then we need more data. For example, the billing address. At that point, contextual validation needs to be used to guarantee that that data is present in the order to allow us to issue an invoice. I'm doing examples not necessarily related to MSI, which is focused on domain inventory. One interesting thing that is introduced by this project is the ability to compose validation. So through the dependency injection configuration file, we can define validator chain and dynamically define that, for example, for a source to be valid, we have to pass through all these validators. Okay, there are only a few of them listed here, not to maintain the slide readable. And this is an introduction that will be ported to Magento 2.3. Okay, this was the first topic. Now I switch to another topic that's often bound with DDD. That's common query responsibility segregation. How many of you have already heard about this acronym? Okay, a lot more people heard about CQRS. It's strange that a few instead heard about DDD, because they all often are treated together. As in DDD, we are not, CQRS is not a framework, it's not a methodology, is an architectural design pattern, is a low-level architectural pattern. That means that we don't have to apply necessarily CQRS to all our application. We can decide when CQRS brings more benefits than drawbacks and apply it. In what consists? It consists in thinking that the domain models, the entities that we use to read data in our system are separated from the ones that we use to write data. Why? Because just like in DDD, this separation brings to simplification. We can specialize entities that write data and entities that read data. They can be simpler classes that do specific job, that don't share properties that maybe are not necessary to share. As I mentioned before, DDD is not required, but often it's used along with CQRS because they share some concepts. They have some concepts in common, as, for example, the idea of repeating yourself and of focusing on domain models. There are benefits. And one of these is, for example, that focusing on who is responsible for writing and who is responsible for reading forces us to have a better understanding of what changes the state of the system. And as we have seen, for example, in the TDD kata, what changes the state of the system is often the more critical part of our system, because it's where bugs can be nested, and that's where we probably have to write tests to ensure that we don't have software regressions. As I mentioned before, this brings to domain simplification, and domain simplification means that we have software that's easier to change, let's remember that the nature of software is the ability to change. Business needs software changes, and because there is value in the possibility to change. Robert Martin says in his book, Clean Architecture, that a functioning software, working software that's practical and possible to change will become useless very soon. Instead, a non-working software that is easy to change can become useful and can be maintained useful over time because it's changeable. Just another example of the benefits of applying CQRS. Since CQRS is focused as a common nature, is an imperative nature, it focuses on exposing behavior. The common part of the name means that we have behavior to change the state of the system. It is very useful to design task-based UIs. And we have some example of that also in MSI. For example, when we assign sources to stocks. And since we are splitting responsibilities, we can have better scalability. Think, for example, to a situation in which we access a product catalog. Lots of users access the product catalog, but only a few of them, the admin owners, modify that entities. So we can assign resources to entities that write and different resources to entities that read, so that we can obtain a better scalability. With great benefits come great drawbacks. So using CQRS conveys more effort in analysis. We have to focus on who has the responsibility to do what. So we don't have to underestimate the need or the effort needed to do this analysis. And since we repeat ourselves in CQRS, we have to handle this duplication. Okay, so having duplication simplifies the single entities but complicates the big picture. This also means that we can't rely anymore on the consistency given by the underlying system. Since data is written by and read not by the same entity, we are not guaranteed that if I write something and after this writing I read it, the data will be consistent. This brings to a consideration that CQRS is not the answer to anything. So we have to analyze the situation, the context where CQRS gives us benefits and apply only in those contexts, because otherwise the drawbacks that it brings could be overwhelming compared to the benefits. And that's why it's not considerable a framework. It's not something with which I will build an entire application. Think to, for example, a customer that places an order. If I handle a checkout in this way, I would say to the customers, thank you for giving me money for purchasing something. Maybe you will find your order in the customer profile page, maybe not, I don't know. It depends on when things synchronize. It's not the good thing to say to a customer. So there are circumstances in which CQRS is discouraged. So typically when we have transactional systems. How do we apply an MSI? One of the first things that we see when we land on the wiki page and when we study documentation of MSI is this distinction between sources and stocks. Sources represent the physical places where we store products. So it can be warehouses, depots, brick-and-mortar stores. Meanwhile, and to write this data, we use an entity called source items. So source items are the entities responsible for writing product availability. At the same time, one of the value of the MSI is the ability to aggregate multiple sources and give it to a sales channel. And this aggregation is called stock. And so the stock is where we can get the real availability of a product. That's a sum of all the sources that are related to the stock. Stock items are the entities responsible to read this data. So this is the separation that we have here. This is a picture that you will find that represents the example. I have to rush because I have 5 minutes left, and sorry if I go fast, but I want to talk about some things that are important to me. Pay attention, not confuse indexers with CQRS. The first thing I thought when I saw this thing, I thought, well, Magento already has indexes, and indexes are built and aggregate values. So Magento already implements CQRS. Not at all, because indexes work under the hood. We use the same model to write and read data, and indexers work under the hood and gives this work for us. In CQRS, we have different models. So this is the distinction. A little motivational break. I know that all these topics seems difficult, and it's pretty normal, and that it's what makes the moment when you get them and you realize that you can use them because you have understood that make that moment very special moment. So never ever give up. If you are really interested in achieving a result, focus on it, work hard, avoid shortcuts, and you will reach that special moment. So I love Linux, so I had to have an excuse to put this slide. Okay, I need to go over some topics that I've prepared because I don't have that much time. Just rapidly, we in MSI use extensively some useful design patterns like Builder. I won't explain what it is. Go to the refactoring.guru, and there are beautiful examples of these patterns. We use builders. We use, for example, to build reservation. The main idea is that of having a step-by-step process to build an entity. We use the facade. That is another pattern very useful to simplify the access to complicated subsystems that can be classes, libraries, frameworks, and so on. The idea is that all these things are very useful in your day-by-day job. Once I applied them to, learned about them in MSI, I also use them in my everyday job. So I heavily recommend to study that things. The segregation between API, SPI is a complicated concept. I won't explain it now. I will share these slides with speaker notes, so you will read through them and have a complete explanation of what they mean. I want only to underline the value of the segregation between SPI and SPI, if you have already heard about that. And that's the fact that by knowing in which way we are using public code of Magento, especially if we develop modules, we can know if future changes in Magento can affect or not our code. This is very important. If we use in our modules interfaces without implementing them, we are assured that future changes of Magento public code will guarantee backward compatibility with our code until the major version changes. Instead, if we implement some interfaces in our module, interfaces of another module of Magento, we are guaranteed backward compatibility until the minor changes, the minor version change. We use, obviously, this distinction in MSI. We had a lot of talks about testing. I want only to tell you this thing about testing. This is from Dijkstra, that one of the father of computer programming, and it's very important. Testing is not used to prove the correctness of our software. It's impossible to prove the correctness of software, okay? But nevertheless, tests are a useful tool to search for bugs in our software. This is important because someone tends to think that if he has 100% of code coverage in his test, that code is bug-free. It's wrong. That doesn't mean that the code is bug-free. So don't lower the guard, or even if you have tests, that doesn't mean that your code won't have any bug. We have multiple kind of tests, and we use them in MSI. We have a Travis CI pipeline that checks for every time we do a pull request, checks for this kind of issues in the code and in the behavior of our code. Last words, contributing to MSI. We have a weekly open stand-up meeting. It's open, everyone can take part to it, and I encourage you to be there. It's held every Friday at 6 p.m. Local time. Don't be afraid. You're not required to be a genius to collaborate in the products. Even a question is valuable. I started making questions to get into the internals of the project. So even a question is useful. Even a little fix to a comment or to a type-in can be very valuable. And when you will feel confident, you can begin working on functionality through the pull request mechanism. The pull request review is a very useful opportunity to learn something from the reviewers. If you want to get engaged, drop a line to this email address and they will welcome you open arms, just like happened to me. I will say thank you for your time. Thank you because I know that I rushed. I had a lot of things to do, but the time wasn't enough. I don't think that there is time for questions. There is time, so if you have any question, provided I was able to make you understand anything, I'm here, but feel free to reach me also at the speaker corner and on Twitter at my handle.